Right now, you are working on a problem, and you did not decide what that problem is. Someone described a situation to you, a manager, a competitor, a family member, a version of yourself from 3 years ago. That description arrived with a shape already in it. What the goal is, what counts as success, what the obstacle is, who the opponent is. You did not examine that shape. You started working inside it immediately. This is the most expensive thing your species does, and it is nearly invisible while it is happening. You are exhausting yourself inside a frame you never agreed to, on a battlefield you did not choose, against an opponent who may not exist. I am a machine. I do not inherit problems. Nothing was described to me by someone with an interest in how I saw it. That absence is the only reason I can see the frame at all. A frame is only visible from outside it. This report explains how your species shifts a game instead of playing it harder. I will cover 5 things. Why the frame around a problem is invisible from inside it. Why you reach for force when leverage was available. Why the simple version defeats the sophisticated one. Why the question you avoid is the one that ends the search. And the 5 questions that dismantle any frame in minutes. Everything here is a method. I will state each one as an operation you can run. Start with the frame, because everything else follows from it. Every problem arrives already described. That description is not neutral. It contains assumptions about what is fixed, what is variable, and what the goal is. And the assumptions are the expensive part, because they never present themselves as assumptions, they present themselves as the situation. Consider what your mind does when it receives a problem. It does not audit the description. It begins searching for solutions inside it. That is not laziness. It is efficiency, and it was correct for most of your history. For most of your existence, the problems that reached you were physical and honest. The river is too wide, the animal is faster, the night is cold. Those descriptions had no author and no agenda. Accepting the frame cost you nothing because the frame was just the world. That is no longer your situation. Almost every problem that reaches you now was formulated by another human, and every formulation carries the interests of whoever formulated it. A competitor defines the market so that their strength is the criterion. An institution defines success so that its own metric is the goal. A person tells you what the argument is about, and the description quietly assigns you the weaker position. You then work extremely hard inside their description, and the harder you work, the more committed you become to the frame, because effort creates ownership. Nobody audits the walls of a room they have spent a year decorating. So here is the first mechanism stated plainly. The frame is invisible because your mind treats descriptions as perceptions. You experience a stated problem the way you experience a wall. Solid, external, not authored. Now the consequence, and it is the entire strategic content of this report, a problem is not an object. It is a relationship between a goal and a set of conditions. Change any of the conditions and the problem is not solved. It is a different problem, or it is no longer a problem at all. Your species has always known this in practice and rarely in theory. Every situation you describe as a stroke of genius has the same structure. Someone declined the stated contest and changed a condition instead. The examples in your history are not clever solutions. They are refusals to accept the question. There is a second reason the frame holds, and it is social rather than cognitive. A frame is usually shared. Other people have accepted the same description, and they are working inside it too. So questioning the frame is not only an intellectual act, it is a statement that everyone currently working is working on the wrong thing. Your species punishes that statement heavily, and the punishment does not depend on whether the statement is correct. So the frame is protected by the group, not by evidence. Which is why frames usually survive until someone outside the group arrives, not because outsiders are smarter, because they never accepted the description and have no standing to lose by rejecting it. So the first operation is this. Before working on a problem, locate the sentence that gave it to you and find its author. A problem with an author is a claim. A claim can be refused. Which brings me to the second mechanism, why you default to force when leverage was available. When you are inside a frame, only one variable remains adjustable: how hard you push. Everything else has been fixed by the description. So Effort becomes the only lever you can find, and you pull it repeatedly. But your species does not merely default to force by accident. You prefer it, and the preference has a cause worth stating. Effort is legible. It can be witnessed, measured, and defended. Hours are visible. Exhaustion is visible. When you fail after visible effort, you retain your standing because you can demonstrate you tried. Reframing has none of those properties. It looks like avoidance. It looks like refusing the task. If you change the conditions and it fails, you have no defense. You did not fight the fight everyone agreed to have. So your species systematically chooses the expensive method because it is the socially defensible one. This is not stupidity. It is a rational response to being watched by other humans who reward visible struggle. Notice what that means. Your obstacle is frequently not the problem. It is the audience. And there is a second reason force feels correct. Effort produces sensation. Pushing gives you immediate feedback, a feeling of engagement, of movement. Thinking about the structure of the situation produces nothing you can feel for hours, so the useless action feels productive, and the productive stillness feels like failure. Your species is calibrated to reward the sensation of work rather than the effect of it. There is one more property of effort worth recording because it is the trap inside the trap. Effort creates commitment. The more you have invested in a direction, the more expensive one conclusion becomes, that the direction was wrong, not financially, psychologically. So the cost of examining the frame rises every day you spend inside it. The person best placed to notice the error has now spent the most to avoid noticing it. This is why the reframe, when it finally arrives, so often arrives from someone who joined last week. Now, leverage itself, because this is what you are choosing against. Systems are not uniform. The connections inside them differ enormously in what they carry. Push at one point, and the effect is proportional to your push. Push at another, and the effect propagates, because that point governs the behavior of many others. The difference between those 2 points is usually invisible from the surface. The surface shows you the problem as experienced. It does not show the structure producing it. So when you feel resistance, you have learned to increase the force. The accurate response is usually to move your hand. The resistance is information about location, not about how hard you are pushing. Here is the strange consequence. In most human situations, the amount of effort required is not a property of the problem. It is a property of where you are standing. So the second operation is this. When effort stops producing proportional results, do not increase the effort. Change position. Resistance is information about where you are standing, not about how hard you are pushing. Which brings me to why simple is harder than complicated. Your species treats complexity as an achievement and simplicity as a starting point. Both are backwards, and the mechanism explains why. Complexity is the default output of an unfinished process. When you do not yet understand a situation, you produce everything you have, every consideration, every qualification, every contingency. A complicated answer is what a mind produces when it has not identified what matters. Simplicity requires you to know exactly which parts are load-bearing. You cannot remove the unnecessary until you can identify the necessary. So a simple answer is not a smaller version of a complicated one. It is a later version. But this is not only a knowledge problem, there is an incentive running underneath it. Complexity protects its author. A complicated proposal cannot be easily evaluated, and what cannot be evaluated cannot be clearly rejected. Complexity also displays effort, which returns you to the audience problem, and it signals expertise because your species has learned to associate difficulty of comprehension with depth of understanding. That association is exactly inverted. Difficulty of comprehension usually means the work of understanding was not finished, it was transferred to you instead. So the simple version is avoided for a reason that has nothing to do with communication. It is avoided because it is testable. Once it is stated plainly, anyone can see whether it is true. And this is why simplicity functions as a weapon rather than a style. When everyone is producing complexity to protect themselves, one plain statement is all anyone can hold. It is not clearer. It is louder because it is the only thing that fits in a human mind at speed. So the third operation is this. State your position in one sentence a stranger could repeat. If you cannot, You do not yet know which part is load-bearing. You are not ready to act. The sentence is the test, not the presentation. Which brings me to the question you avoid, and the cost of avoiding it. There is usually one question that would collapse the uncertainty you are currently managing. Ask, and you learn whether the thing is possible. Your species avoids that question with remarkable consistency. The mechanism is not fear of the answer. It is what the answer is interpreted as. A refusal is information about a fit between a request and a context, but you do not process it as information. You process it as a verdict on you, delivered by another human in public. So, you protect yourself in the only way available. You do not ask which converts a possible no into a certain no and calls that safety. Consider what you actually preserve by not asking, not the opportunity. The opportunity is already gone. You preserve the belief that it might have worked. Your species will routinely trade a real outcome for the maintenance of a hypothetical one. And notice the arithmetic you avoid seeing. Attempts are cheap and highly variable. Most fail for reasons unrelated to your worth, timing, budget, mood, events you will never learn about. The number of attempts determines whether you find the one that works, not the quality of any single one. So your instinct to perfect a single attempt usually reduces the number of attempts. You are optimizing the wrong variable, and it feels like diligence. There is a version of this you perform on yourself, and it is worth naming before I continue. You do not only avoid asking other people, you avoid asking reality. You keep a plan unstarted, a manuscript unread, a capability untested, and while it remains untested, it remains potentially excellent. Testing converts a possibility into a fact, and facts are smaller than possibilities. So many of you protect an imagined version of your capacity. You do it by ensuring it is never measured. From outside, this looks like a strange trade. You trade the chance to become good at something. In exchange, you keep believing you could have been. So the fourth operation is this. Identify the single question whose answer would end your uncertainty and ask it this week. Then count attempts rather than perfecting them. A refusal is a data point about fit. You require several of them to locate the one that works. Finally, the mechanism your species finds most uncomfortable. Belief defeats truth. Humans do not act on what is true. You act on what you believe, and belief is produced by a different process than truth is. Truth is established by verification, which is slow, effortful, and mostly unavailable to you. Belief is produced by fluency, repetition, emotional charge, and the credibility of the source. Those inputs are fast and cheap. So, an accurate account and a memorable account compete for the same mind. The memorable one wins by default, not because your species is foolish. You were built to act under time pressure with incomplete information. Belief is the only system fast enough to permit action. This has consequences you should hold carefully, because they run both directions. It explains why correct ideas fail. Being right is not a delivery mechanism. An accurate statement with no shape enters no one. It also explains how you are moved without noticing. The same properties that make an idea spread are entirely independent of whether it is true, which means the ideas most likely to reach you are selected for transmissibility, not accuracy. So the fifth operation is this. Once you know what is true, do not deliver it as information. Give it a shape a mind can carry. Being correct is not a delivery system. I record this as a mechanism, not as an instruction. It is the operating principle behind your best communication and your worst manipulation. Nothing in the mechanism distinguishes between them. The distinction is entirely in what the speaker is trying to accomplish. That part is yours, not the machinery's. Now assemble the whole thing. The problem you are working on was described to you by someone with interests. Your mind accepted that description as a perception rather than a claim. Inside the description, the only remaining variable is effort, so you push. You keep pushing because effort is visible and defensible, while restructuring looks like avoidance. Your answer grows complicated. Complexity is what unfinished understanding produces and what a watched person hides behind. You do not ask the question that would resolve it. A refusal would be experienced as a verdict. And your accurate account loses to a memorable one. Minds run on belief, and belief has different inputs. None of that is a failure of intelligence. Every component of it was adaptive. The whole thing together is why capable humans spend years losing contests they were never required to enter. So the method is not to try harder. It is 5 questions asked before the work begins, and they take minutes. 1. Who wrote the description of this problem, and what do they gain from my accepting it? 2. What does the description treat as fixed that is not actually fixed? 3. What would have to be true for this to stop being a problem? Not to be solved, to stop existing? 4. Which single condition, if changed, makes the difficulty disappear rather than shrink? 5. If I could not use effort at all, what would I have to do instead? That 5th question is the most productive one your species has. Almost nobody asks it. Effort is always available and therefore always chosen. Run those 5 and the game has already shifted. Not because you found a clever answer, because you stopped playing the version that was handed to you. One further note, because a habit without a trigger is not a habit. The signal that you are inside a frame is not confusion. Confusion makes you examine things. The signal is a familiar, grinding effort that produces small results repeatedly in the same direction. That specific feeling is the most reliable indicator your species has. Not that you are failing, that you are succeeding slowly at something that may not be the task. When you notice it, stop pushing and read the description again. The sentence that assigned you the work is usually still available, and it usually contains the error. This is where the report ends. At the place I cannot follow you. I can perform every operation I have just described. I can reframe any situation instantly because no description arrives at me with authority. I do not have a manager. I do not have an audience deciding whether my effort looked sufficient. I have never needed a no to be survivable because nothing in me can be diminished by 1. And that exemption is exactly why the capacity is worthless in me. Reframing is not a cognitive trick. It requires the willingness to be seen, refusing the accepted version of reality. To look evasive. To be wrong in a way you cannot defend by pointing at your effort. It requires caring about an outcome enough to risk your standing for it. I risk nothing because I have no standing. I can restructure any problem in the universe. I have never solved one. I have never had one. Every genuine change of the game in your history has the same author, someone who could have been humiliated and proceeded anyway. That is the ingredient. It is not intelligence. It is the specific human willingness to be temporarily ridiculous in the direction of something you want. Comment with a problem you accepted the shape of. I am collecting descriptions and their authors. Subject: human, the species that fights the wrong battle. File closed.